on this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone. All right, and there we go. Can you let me know if you see the slideshow? Do you see the slideshow?
Yes, you're good.
Okay,
Yes.
and Jessica and Jeannie, if you wouldn't mind just taking that, doing that quick survey, that would be wonderful. Just use that QR code and pop that in there. I'll give you like a minute to do that. All right, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So our topic for today is a discussion about communication. In particular, we're going to be focusing on augmentative and alternative communication, but our title is Communication, a Right, Not a Privilege. And as I mentioned, Dana and I are both with the Delaware MTSS Technical Assistance Center, and we are in partnership with the Delaware Department of Education to support those across the state. And this is one of our statewide initiatives in terms of augmentative communication for all learners. For today's presentation, and these are the professional learning standards that we have adopted through the Delaware MTSS. As you can see, these learning standards are from Learning Forward, and we're really looking at the purpose of this particular presentation is professional development for educators. And for today's session, we are looking at the concept of implementation, where we're going to be talking about implementation of supports and services for students with complex needs who are multilingual learners. Okay, our norms for today: be open-minded, be present, and please, please feel free to ask questions and comment. We are a small group, and so that hopefully will lend itself to some really good conversation. Right, our objectives are to learn the importance of augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, as we refer to it. We are also looking at learning some strategies that will support our multilingual individuals who use AAC. And we will also be looking at ways for you in your programs to create a community of communication for all students in your schools. Okay, so what is augmentative and alternative communication? So I would invite either of you to go ahead and either put in the chat or feel free to say, to speak up and say, what is your concept of what AAC is? Are you familiar with it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can't see you, so just so you know, let me see if I can try to, there we go. There we go, now I can, all right. There we go. So are you familiar with AAC? Or not really? Okay.
Yeah, they said no.
No, all right. Well, good to know. Then that's why we're here. We're going to talk about it. So let's see. Come on. All right. There we go. So augmentative and alternative communication refers to all the different ways that individuals share their thoughts and feelings without speaking. Okay. And, you know, as us as communicators, we use AAC every day. As an example, right now, I'm using not just my verbal skills, but as you can see through the screen, I'm using my hands, right? I use my hands to talk. I use lots of gestures, our facial expressions, etc. You know, let's take a look at our little friend Emily and kind of take a look at how our students who are multilingual communicate with us and give you an example. Can you hear that and see it?
She here? Inside.
Yes.
Oh, it's Juliet. Hi, Juliet. Hello, Juliet.
Say, how are you, Emily?
How are you? How are you?
Good.
Yeah, Juliet's good. And how are you?
Good.
Yeah, she's good.
Copy me.
She wants you to copy her. Oh. doing the same. Oh, and Juliet, they're all doing it. Look.
A, B, C, D. Se van a tratar, serán un vestir. Óyeme. Por favor. ¿Quién? Tú.
Está bailando con la rodilla.
Cuando Emily empezó en el cole, su comunicación con la gran mayoría de profesionales y de niños era mediante gestos, salvo con la logopeda, la tutora y conmigo. Poco a poco ha ido aumentando, pero el gran cambio de Emily se vio el año pasado cuando empezó con este comunicador. Emily fue una esponja y todo lo aprendió rapidísimo. Entonces ha ido avanzando a pasos cada vez más grandes, tanto con el comunicador como con las personas con las que ella lo usa.
Sí. Ah, vale. Elefante.
10 years ago, anything that I read said that Emily wouldn't live until she was 2 years of age. And if she did, I will never forget what we read, said that she would be devoid of personality and unaware of her surroundings. So everything was just bad. Whereas 10 years later, I know that's not the case and everything isn't bad.
Do you want to take this off? Yeah?
Emily always makes first progress at home. And sometimes she takes a long time to do it in public or to do it with other people. So because Emily wasn't showing things out of the house, many people doubted her. And especially, I was told on many, many occasions not to speak to her in English. I knew Emily understood. I knew she understood me. I could always see that she understood me. And she has no problem switching from language to language, understanding both languages. And it's just, you know, it's just fantastic.
So I love this story of Emily because she is really a true example of multiple modalities, right? And languages, right? So she's a true multilingual communicator from a language perspective, as well as you notice in the beginning, she uses other aspects of communication, such as gestures, facial expressions, modeling, body movements. And it's really remarkable how her team, including her family, as well as her teachers and school team, have kind of worked together, right? And that's something that we understand in the community, how important it is to have the family and the community involved for this very reason. As Mom referenced, that a lot of times Emily will demonstrate skills at home and then when she's comfortable, you know, sort of bring that into other settings. And so, you know, I think it really is a wonderful example of and highlights the importance of that. So I just wanted to share her with her. And you should have access to these slides. So if you want to, you know, have access to that video, you should be able to get it pretty easily. Oops. Oh, all right, sorry. Okay. And so just very briefly, the American Speech and Hearing Association looks at augmentative communication, or AAC, as a two-prong system, right? So we have individuals who use other supports to either augment their communication, meaning it supports what they already have or their existing communication system. It's not their primary means, but it supports. And we have many individuals who utilize, structured supports for a short period of time, where it is supporting their speech and language development. And then we also have those individuals who may use some sort of additional support system throughout their entire life, right? Because that then becomes their alternative means of communication instead of speech, if speech is not something that's going to evolve for them. So it's not just used as one form of communication, or, you know, and as an alternative, it can also be utilized as a way to augment or support existing communication for an individual. And as we were talking about a few minutes ago, AAC includes all of these things: facial expressions, gestures, body language. It also includes what we're going to talk about, and that is specific communication systems. There are devices or computer systems that can be used on iPads, or there are what we call dedicated systems as well. We can use picture boards, and we're going to show you a few of those things. But writing is also considered a form of augmentative communication. Anything that supports and augments a person's communication is included in that. So why is AAC important? And I share this slide because oftentimes when we are approached as a speech language pathologist, and I am a speech language pathologist, when we are approached by teachers, by families, the primary concern is often my child is unable to express their wants and needs. They can't tell me if they're tired. They can't tell me if they're hungry. And so first and foremost, we often get folks coming and saying they need to be able to express what they want. But communication, if you think about it, for all of us goes well beyond just expressing our wants and needs, right? It's very important for us to be able to share our information. Social etiquette and social closeness is a priority for all of us throughout our lives. If you looked at Emily and what she was most engaged in, she wasn't necessarily communicating what she wanted from, oh, I want my snack or I want my lunch. She was using her augmentative communication to participate, right? She was participating at the playground. She was participating with a phone call with family. So, really recognizing that augmentative communication, or all communication, should be robust and should include not just being able to express your wants and needs, but being able to share and develop that social closeness that's important for all of us. We also want to talk a little bit about what augmentative communication is not. There are a lot of theories and myths and things out there, that float around and say, well, this is what this means. Augmentative communication, is just a toy. It's something that's there to entertain, or it's a reward for a child. AAC is not those things. It is a support system to help folks who are unable to speak and use their verbal speech in order to effectively communicate with others. And so, we really look at it as a tool to help support language learning and communication success. And so I really love this particular visual because, it really highlights some of the pieces or some of the barriers that we see with folks, who are nonverbal. One right here I really like, it's not activity specific. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it should always be available to students. Oops. There we go. So let's talk about our multilingual communicators. And again, I welcome you, Jessica and Jeannie, to share any input or share any of your observations or thoughts. For individuals who use AAC and are multilingual, our goal is to really be able to generalize their communication skills across different settings by fostering communication opportunities and pulling in that family and community. Again, going back to that video of Emily and, thinking about her family and the importance of that family piece, because the family piece often brings in also the cultural aspects and those individualized pieces that make a child that child, right? That make us who we are. And so it's really important to make sure we're incorporating the community and the family when we're thinking about a child's communication system and what skills they need. We want to make sure that we are incorporating both the individual's home language and elements of their culture. So for our students who are using, who are exposed to and are utilizing two different languages, those languages, both of those languages should be accessible to them through the augmentative communication system, whatever that system may be. Additionally, we want to make sure that it's readily available and that there's intentionality in terms of implementing strategies to make sure that we're engaging our culturally diverse students, especially those who struggle academically. I think that the key word here is the intentional aspect of it, and making sure that we're incorporating those other pieces that we just described. Making sure the language and the cultural pieces are integrated into, what we're providing and what supports we're providing for our students who are culturally diverse, and in particular, supporting them from an academic perspective and looking at the materials, the environment, really, kind of that comprehensive universal design to support our students or multilingual learners. Do you all have any other thoughts in terms of what you see as priorities for your students that are multilingual?
I have never heard of this, but this is very interesting. I've actually never thought of that. So it's really good information.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
I have one student that he doesn't
what?
want to speak. He's
Oh,
not speaking at all in class. So he communicates with me, like he points to the answer or he writes it or he draws it. And I didn't think that this was the same. Like, oh my God, look, okay. I thought this was only the technology part, but no, it's about gestures and all the body. Like I speak with my hands, like
right.
and with
Exactly.
my face too. So I don't know, this is something really interesting.
Yeah, and thinking about the environment, we're going to talk about a couple of those things. Okay, and as we were just discussing, there are different types of augmentative communication, and we refer to them as unaided or aided. And when we say that an individual has unaided communication, AAC, that there's really no external device, right? That can be, again, facial expressions, sign language, right? Manual signs, natural speech vocalizations, etc. When we talk about aided augmentative communication, we're talking about including those external support systems. It can be electronic or not electronic. And we think of it in terms of low tech, which can be things like visual schedules for students, where you have pictures that line up to help give them clues as to what's happening next for their daily schedule. Communication boards, which are pictures on a board that they can point to that has, very specific vocabulary to help support them. And then there's high-tech system. For example, there are applications that can be put onto iPhones, onto iPads, and we're going to talk about some of these things, and tablets. Some of the tablets have applications that can be put on them. And then there's something called a speech generating device, which is what you're probably thinking about when you think about those high-tech systems. To break it down a little bit further, this is just a list for your reference of high tech and low tech. And these are just examples of different types that you will have access to. So if you're, looking at pursuing different types of augmentative communication for a student, this is a good reference that will allow you to research and try to determine high tech and low tech. And we're not going to talk about this today specifically. However, I do want to point out that when thinking about an augmentative communication system for a student, you really want to approach it as a team. And that team would include, for example, the teacher, your administration, speech language pathologists, other related services, individuals that play a key role, the family. So individuals that play a key role in supporting this particular child. The decision to provide a specific support system really should be made based on the child's individual needs and determining what works best for them. So I would always, refer to your student's team in terms of making those decisions, in terms of whether a child is, a high tech or a low tech user. Okay, so here's some AAC myths. So a lot of times we get folks that are coming to us, and again, as an SLP, and I do these evaluations, and people will say, well, I heard that AAC is. So are there any myths that either of you have heard or any thoughts about augmentative communication that you're wondering about that I can answer for you? Because I have some myths here.
I thought it was only technology,
Ah.
like the portable that they can press a button and talk.
Mm-hmm. Nope. It's all of those other things that we talked about. How about you, Jessica? Any myths that or any perceptions about AAC that you are wondering about?
No, I honestly did not think of it,
That's fine.
but
Well,
I'm learning a lot.
oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Well, just to give you some ideas, if people come to you and say, well, AAC, we don't do that. You have to start with, only 1 or 2 words. Not a requirement. There are no requirements of how you should start with 1 word or 2 words, right? It's always individualized to each student. There is no prerequisite. Well, we can't use an augmentative system until the child, has this vocabulary, right? So there are really no prerequisites. Another myth that we often hear is that if a child is using augmentative communication, then they will not speak or they'll lose the language that they already have. And that is a total myth. And in fact, research has shown us that the opposite is true, and that those students who are exposed to augmentative communication and have those scaffolded supports actually develop speech and language, and it facilitates that language development. So that's another myth. And the other one that I already alluded to a little bit was that many people think that AAC only should be used for expressing wants and needs. And as we all know, that's not how we communicate, right? We communicate by sharing information and interacting with each other, and augmentative communication should be a part of all the ways that we communicate. So now you know the myths, and you can tell everybody when they ask you. Okay, so one of the big pieces about the utilization or, incorporating augmentative communication into a child's daily routines, into their academic life, is recognizing that we need to presume potential and presume confidence in our students, right? And we're going to talk about why it's important to do that right now. I'm going to share this with you. This is a wonderful video, and this really speaks to some of our students where maybe we might have a preconceived idea about what they can and cannot do. This video provides us with some really good thought-provoking ideas as to maybe how we can switch that mindset a little bit.
Hi, my name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm an assistive technology trainer for Loudoun County Public Schools. And I want to tell you about a concept called the least dangerous assumption, which can really empower students. When you don't have enough evidence to make a judgment or an assessment about a student's performance or abilities, assume they can do whatever you're asking them to do. Every educator needs to make a decision about technology they need to put in place, and they're not sure if they should put option A in place or option B in place. This can be particularly difficult in the world of disabilities because there might not always be a perfect answer. So teachers can look to this solution using the least dangerous assumption to make a decision about what technology might be best. The least dangerous assumption has 3 principles. Principle number 1 is that everyone has different abilities and talents. No 2 people are exactly alike. Principle number 2 states that you can't judge a person's full future success based on 1 score, like an IQ score. There's way more to a person than just 1 test score. Principle number 3 states that people learn best when they feel valued, when they have some sort of meaning to their life. Anyone can use these 3 principles to make choices about what's the best option for a student, what's going to restrict the student in the least possible way. Since I've learned the concept of the least dangerous assumption, it's really changed my practice, and I have not put limits on students. Students that I work with now, when they leave on the last day, they haven't just met their goals and objectives for a year. They were able to meet their goals and objectives that they came up with, that they wanted to do, that they wanted to achieve. When you're working with a person with a disability, if you're going to fail, fail because you believe in the person's potential, not because you put some sort of artificial limit on it.
And Kim, if I can interject that this video, every time we watch it, it reminds me of this book that I read. It's called Fish in a Tree. And I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's about a girl who has cerebral palsy and she's nonverbal. And she actually is brilliant. I'm sorry, not Fish in a Tree. This one that comes to mind is called Out of My Mind. That's the one. It's about the girl who has cerebral palsy. And it's just her teachers. This is a prime example of like, she uses her device to communicate or share out answers, but her teachers really think that
Hi,
she
my
just
name is
can't do. And she winds up winning a schools like Geography B, and helps the team just succeed. And everyone was surprised because they didn't think that she knew. She actually has a profound vocabulary. It was very robust, because that's all she did. Like if people weren't talking with her, she was just learning. Like her parents just set up the environment at home for her to just learn and read and engage in the world through literature. So that video just always makes me think, just if we as educators go into something with the mindset that students can do and create those supportive environments for them to thrive, we'll be able to see that they're actually able to reach the intended learning goals. So anyway, every time I see it, it pops in my mind.
Yeah, I've read that book. It's a fabulous book. I love that book. And that, kind of ties into this idea of communication as a right? It's not a privilege that we only give to certain individuals, correct? When we think about communication, we need to recognize that it's a right that we all have as humans. And this particular resource, which I have at the end, it's connected to the end of the PowerPoint, is a Bill of Rights, similar to, if you think about our Bill of Rights within the Constitution, et cetera, that talks about what the rights are for individuals from a communication perspective. For example, one of the Bill of Rights, a communication Bill of Rights, is that we all have the right to refuse and say no. We all have a right to communicate in every situation at all times. And so this is another excellent resource that I would recommend and that we do have linked at the end of the presentation that we will share. So when you are in your classrooms, in your environment, in your educational environments, your goal is to think about this concept of presuming competence. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by being a detective. And we recognize when we're looking at our students and we're observing them and we're watching them in all these different environments, we need to recognize and presume that when we see behaviors, that the behaviors that we are seeing are communicative. Whenever we see a child who's behaving in some way, they're trying to convey a message to us, right? And what we need to do as educators is think about what is the communicative purpose behind that behavior. One of my favorite sayings, and I say this to students, I say this to educators that I work with, is that a behavior is not just a behavior. There is intentionality behind that. There is a purpose. And so we always want to assume that the communication that we're seeing is intentional. It's not just some arbitrary thing that's come up out of nowhere, some arbitrary behavior. There's a reason for that. And we also need to make sure we're recognizing and assuming that an individual can and wants to communicate for a variety of reasons. Sometimes we place boundaries on our students by only encouraging them to do things like answer a question, as opposed to encouraging them to share an idea. And so part of this idea of presuming competence is expanding our mindset and recognizing that. All right, let's think about school and what kinds of opportunities then we're thinking along these lines, and we're recognizing that we need to presume the competence of our communicators. Let's look at how we can use augmentative communication and create those opportunities in school. One of the most important ways to do that is to really think about the environment that our students are in. So I invite you to stop and think about your classrooms that you have gone into and worked in. How have your past classrooms been arranged for a student who potentially uses augmentative communication? And how does your school community support your students through their space, through their rooms, who use some sort of augmentative communication or who have needs to communicate through different means rather than just verbal means? So what are you seeing in your school communities? Or haven't you really seen much at this point?
I honestly have not seen much in our school building.
Okay. So do you think that there are students within your school community that could potentially benefit from some sort of alternative communication to support their overall speech and language and interactions?
So far here in elementary school, we have not had students who actually need this alternate communication, but it would be interesting to actually be able to, put this in effect with students that need it.
For sure, yeah. Jeannie, how about you?
A couple of years ago, I had a student that he had the technology and he didn't want to use it all the time. But this year I had the muted student that he doesn't want to speak. And mom tells me that he speaks at home, but he doesn't want to speak in school. He understands English and Spanish because I can see that when I'm talking, he's like nodding or he's pointing. But I'm wondering, what could we do to help him? Like, for example, every time I do an assessment that he has to tell me the letter name or something, he doesn't produce it. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering
how to be able to support him, right? And what does your environment, what does the classroom environment look like, and how can you provide some of those supports, right? And so what you want to do, for example, for your student is really look at some patterns of participation. How is that student participating in his academic routine? So what are some of the strengths? You just mentioned a strength in that you discussed how he's responding and he understands both of the languages. But then there were some challenges in that when you are presenting, activities to him, he's not able to give you any verbal responses. So that obviously is a challenge to that environment. And then, how independent is that particular student and how engaged? What are the student's interests? How is that student engaging in all aspects of their curriculum? So these would be questions that you want to ask, right? Some of the strategies that we utilize and that we incorporate are things like looking at the activities. What are the materials that you're using? Where are you providing those particular interactions with this particular student? And you were saying that this particular student, for example, Jeannie, location might be important for this particular student because he or she isn't very comfortable in communicating in a school environment. So you would need to think about that. What kind of pictures perhaps might be effective, right? Are pictures effective for them? Do they have, if a student does have a communication device, where is that device? Is it accessible to them? Is it accessible so that they can participate in whatever activities are happening in the classroom? So how you arrange the environment becomes really crucial in order for the students to be able to participate. And it's activities, it's materials, it is also people, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. When we think about arranging the classroom environment, and this is for those students who do have some sort of augmentative system, we also need to make sure that that system is accessible to them at all times. So is it charged? Where is it stored? Does it need a mounting system? How are classroom desks and chairs arranged? So really just thinking about what does this environment look like so that my student who has complex needs is able to participate. I would invite you to take a look at this particular video. We're not going to look at it right now, but I would encourage you to take a look at this. As again, you do have this particular video accessible for you, after the presentation. There's some really good tips and tricks in there. Just talking about, understanding your students' communication system, et cetera. So maybe something to keep in your back pocket when you do have a student that comes into your classroom that is utilizing augmentative communication. Oops, sorry. Oh. And so always really thinking and stepping back and reflecting on, does the student that I'm working with, do they have access? And when we can substitute the word device, we can say, do they have access to communication throughout the day? Do they have the vocabulary that they need in order to participate throughout the day? Do they have the opportunities to be independent, or are they constantly needing an adult to prompt them? And do we provide them with the correct time and the amount of time to process and communicate effectively? So if these are questions that you're asking, then I would say you'd step back and talk as a team to recognize the importance of any of your students who are not sufficiently participating and communicating throughout the entire day in all of their academic and social aspects of school. What can you do within the context of the environment to support that? So one way that we really emphasize, and one of the most important pieces for our kids who are complex to be able to participate in their school environment, is by utilizing communication partners. Okay. And we are all communication partners. Everyone that interacts with a particular child is their communication partner. And so what can we do? So we've talked about the environment, but now what can we do to support our students? So if you think about it, and I'm going to, Jeannie, I'm going to reference you because you have that one student. In what school environments do you think a communication partner would be beneficial for your particular student? Do you think having an adult with them, or a communication partner who can help support their communication, where might that be effective for them, if at all?
Well, he has a best friend that he speaks to him.
I love it.
So when I take him out of the room, I learned that. So I take them both together, and he's having fun. You can see that they're having fun. So
that friend is a communication partner for that particular student.
yes,
Right.
yes.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned, you are a communication partner to him at different times, right? His teachers, his family, his siblings, etc. Anyone that's interacting with a person. Another really fun video to take a look at, if you'd like to see a little bit more about that, is linked to this right here. So when you download the PowerPoint, you can go ahead and, follow that link, and it will take you to a nice fun video. I want to get to some specific things. That's why we're kind of going through some of this. And the role of a communication partner is exactly what you described from that little friend, right? Engaging, establishing, good interaction, using gestures that are meaningful, matching the student, right? Back and forth, creating that back and forth communication. So it sounds like you have a really wonderful little communication partner in the little boy's friend. And this is actually a wonderful example of a communication partner. And Dana's laughing because she knows this is my favorite video, and I do have to show this one, Dana, if it's okay. All right, this is literally my favorite communication partner video. I will set the stage for you. These are siblings, but listen very carefully to what's happening.
Obstacle. More.
Aiden, you want to turn? Okay.
Mama. 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 Mama.
He's saying bathroom.
Aiden, no, we're not going to talk about bathroom talk at dinner. Aiden. Oh my goodness, come on. All right, let's give Ethan back his talker. Hey, Ethan. No, we're not gonna talk about bathroom talk at the dinner table. No. Do you have anything else you'd like to talk about? Because it's not bathroom talk time. Okay, all right, all done.
So what's happening there is what we
Besides
call,
inappropriate talk.
sorry, what did you say?
So besides inappropriate talk. But I
Besides
love the way the
inappropriate,
mom like redirected. Like that's what a teacher would do. Like, you know, it wasn't a harsh redirect. It was just like, again, we're at the dinner table. We don't have bathroom talk at the dinner table. And the same with teaching. You know, you would redirect behavior the way you would anyone else and do that. But it was really cute. Sorry,
yeah,
Kim.
it really is good. This comes up actually often when sometimes we do have students that are utilizing, they use their communication system to tell us maybe things that we don't want to hear. However, that mom did a beautiful job, as Dana described, of addressing it like she would with any of her children, right? And so that's what we want to recognize, is that is that in child's voice. And so she addressed it in the same way. She didn't take it away from them, right? She didn't put it on a shelf somewhere. She addressed it as that is he was saying those things to her. So, and what those other two.
You wouldn't take a person's voice when he says something.
Exactly. Yes, you're exactly right. That's exactly right. And that is exactly what we say. You got it. And there's a term for what you just saw, and that's called aided language modeling. And that's a tool that we use. And when we have individuals who are, this is another example that's really cute, but we're going to keep moving. But this is what we call modeling, right? Aided language modeling. Great video that talks about that and how to go about that. So if you were utilizing communication system, then this would be a tool, a strategy that you would be using as a communication partner, right? And so that would be something that I would absolutely suggest if you did have, a student with students that you are working with, right? And one of the things, and this happens a lot of times as communication partners, is people get really nervous about it. And they say, well, what if I do it wrong? And what if the student doesn't answer me? And so they don't want to do it, right? It is okay to make mistakes. We all do. And it's a learning process. Utilization of augmentative communication, regardless of whether it's signing, picture boards, etc., is a process. And so we are going to make mistakes as we go along there. So let me go back for a second. I think did I miss something? No. Oops. Okay. We're going to another video, we're going to move through. We also think about how we prompt our students. And one of the things that's really important is what I'm going to emphasize with this particular slide. And again, there's a link to that where it says prompting hierarchy here. But what I want to emphasize is the concept of wait time and making sure that we're giving our students who have communication needs one of their challenges is they need additional wait time. And thinking about your students, right? They may need more time to process the information. They may need more time to organize the language and then be able to express it, right? So being able to do that and recognizing that we're going to use we're going to pause and we're going to wait. And that's something that's also really valuable from a respect perspective too. We're respecting that person's communication needs. And so this is another tool that we introduce and that we use. I wanted to get into vocabulary and AAC because I think this is also very valuable. Jessica, you were talking about what your community has. And so I want to make sure we talk about this a little bit and in particular address it from the perspective of our multilingual, communicators. And so when we're thinking about vocabulary and what kind of vocabulary is important, we want to think about it in terms of that tiered language. And what's important about this particular visual is that we want to recognize that all vocabulary matters. And thinking about your communication user or your students and recognizing that not only is it important for them to have what we refer to as universal core vocabulary, and we're going to talk about that. That's that foundational language, right, that allows them to participate. But it's also very important for our students to be able to utilize specialized vocabulary, for example, vocabulary that's related to school subjects, to things throughout their day, and also individualized vocabulary. And so having access to all of this allows them to be better participants in their school environment. So let's talk a little bit about what this core vocabulary is. So there has been research that has been done on key vocabulary that is essential for all of us and that we use most frequently. And so the universal core vocabulary is the set of 36 highly useful single words that either by themselves or in combination with each other really allot for a wide range of messages that we are able to convey for a variety of purposes. And so this core vocabulary would be that tier one, that foundational piece that we were referencing. And then, as I mentioned, the specialized and the individualized vocabulary. Individualized is specific to that individual, for example, family members, pets, etc. And the specialized vocabulary is specific to content or situation. So for younger students, it would be that vocabulary related to circle time. It would be vocabulary that is referenced like in science, or those extra words. We can sometimes call them fringe words, but there are those extra words that are specific to what's happening in a particular student's life. And so this is typically what core vocabulary would look like in what we call a core board. And these are systems. These are those 36 usable, most useful words. And they are picture boards, right? And we were talking about that earlier. This is another form of communication that is a low-tech system that you could very easily incorporate into a classroom and allow all students to have access to, so that they could communicate these key essential concepts. And as you can see, you know, there are words like open, some, like, want, etc. So we're really integrating key language that we use throughout the day. So these specific vocabulary words, let me go through here. Hold on. Are oftentimes used for things like morning greeting. We utilize core vocabulary for commenting, making decisions, recess with peers, getting outside, socializing during lunchtime. So as you can see, this particular 36-word board can be used so that that particular student can participate throughout the day, right? And it can also be used for all students so that you can get some of that peer modeling like we saw with our friends at the dinner table, right? So if all students have access to something like this, then they are able to participate in the various routines of their school day. We also incorporate it through academics. For example, through questions and reading, providing responses, making connections between the core words that you see and vocabulary words that are introduced in books and stories. They can be utilized during shared reading activities. And when we're thinking about it in the context for our multilingual users, we want to make sure that if you are considering a core vocabulary system, or you want to introduce this idea, we want to make sure that we have these graphic symbol-based systems and that the vocabulary is consistent with both languages, as you can see, right? I saw you take a picture of that. So you want to make sure that, number one, there's someone that is familiar with the student's language and their culture, that you want to make sure you're including words from various parts of speech. So we don't just want all nouns, we don't just want all verbs, we want commenting language, we want pronouns, etc. That we are able to utilize this system for various communicative purposes. And one nice strategy and tool is to sort of use it as a role play, right? For a dialogue and see how that goes with you, for you, right? Practice. These systems take practice, but one of the things that I've learned throughout my years of using it is that I practice with the student and we learn together. Another consideration is that we really want to make sure that we are aware as we're developing any kind of communication system, that we're thinking about the cultural conventions, their dress, gender, buildings, food, religious festivals, customs, right? And in particular, one of the pieces, the cultural sensitivities of, for example, gestures. I encountered this myself personally through working with a young man whose family was from India, and different gestures meant different things than they do to me as someone who's been born and raised in the United States. And so we had to work together with the family. That's why we go back to that conversation of incorporating the family and the community into whatever communication process you are supporting for that child, because it can and oftentimes does look different. Now, I would ask both of you as individuals who specialize in working with multilingual language learners, does this sound consistent for you? Does this resonate with you?
Oh yeah, because even though like for me in Spanish, right? We have people that say the same word and they have different meanings. So we have to be careful with
Yes.
Excellent. So really being conscientious of that when we're developing any kind of augmentative system, whether it be low tech or high tech, having all of these pieces involved. So then your role as a specialist in this area would be vital as part of the team. And I think that's really important to remember that, again, while we say this is a team approach and we talk about all the other players, your role as the specialist becomes extremely important in terms of helping to support the child and the family. We also want to make sure we're thinking about in those high techs, if you ever do think about some high tech systems, you want to think about the voice of the system. Does it reflect that child's community and culture? Is there availability in the systems of pre-established vocabulary packages in both languages? Can you easily switch from one language to another, which oftentimes is necessary, as you saw with Emily in the beginning? And is there typically, there is a need for in-depth knowledge of AAC and linguistic structure of the language itself that you're trying to incorporate? So that team process becomes very important. One thing I will note to all of you is that historically, augmentative communication systems have not lent themselves to robust vocabulary systems for multilanguage learners. However, in the past 5 years, the different organizations, there's different companies that create these systems have made a concerted effort to include a variety of languages, to provide trainings in those languages, to work with individuals who are native speakers of those languages in order to create systems that are consistent and that reflect those differences. So there has been a concerted effort over the past several years, but what we do see is that, and I looked at the research, unfortunately, within the multi-language learner community, the use of augmentative communication systems is not high. And we can presume that some of that is because of accessibility of the systems, right? So now that these systems are becoming more available and there are options for users, hopefully then that will increase the ability to meet the needs of multi-language learners. One final piece that I think is also important too is looking at the keyboard layout and making sure that the graphics, the orthographic aspects of it are consistent. Again, making sure you have diacritics, etc. Making sure we have those bilingual voices, making sure that we can switch between languages. And just some visuals. This gives you some examples of how they've created a community. And as you can see, there are different visuals. They have some things in English, some things in that are just visually based. This is in Belfast. This is an example of one in Belfast. I'll let you take a look at this. I know we're running out of time, but do you want to look at this? Want to take a look at this real quick? Okay. Very short.
Communication board is a board that has pictures on it that we can use to share messages. On our boards in Meath, we have pictures about questions, actions, feelings, requests, and everything you can find in the playground.
So the reason I shared this is because it can be whatever works for you, right? This is an example. I'll go to this next one.
I communicate.
This is an example of a core board that's actually in a school district in Delaware. And so you can see the different ways that core boards can be incorporated. And it would be pretty straightforward to be able to add, for example, in this core board, you could add the Spanish word under or next to each of the words that reflect the actual visual. And these are ways that you can incorporate. Jessica, you were saying you really haven't seen any ways to support students who have communication needs. And this is one straightforward way to raise awareness and to increase opportunities for those students.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So just to sum everything up, we want you all to recognize that AAC promotes communication. We're dispelling all those myths. You are going to go out now and be AAC advocates, right? Assume your student is trying to communicate with you, even if you're unsure of what they're trying to communicate. Remember, all behavior is communicative. There's a message behind it, and there's intention behind that. Recognize that reasons for communication can change over time, but that communication is always important. And with planning, augmentative communication can and should be used throughout the school day with all of our students. This is a list of resources with links. That communication bill of rights that I mentioned is right here. And if you wouldn't mind completing this survey at the end here, we would really appreciate it. And also, do you have any questions? I'm happy to answer them.
No questions. I just want to thank you for the information. It was really good and it was very detailed.
Thank you.
I'm happy that I came because sometimes we think about diversity, right? And in my school, a lot of people talk Spanish and a lot of people talk English. So it's not about, oh, then they're not going to find somebody to speak Spanish to them. But also we have these kids that are more shy. If we use these kinds of boards, right? Visuals are visuals.
Exactly. Exactly.
Visual, it doesn't matter what language.
Absolutely. I love that.
So,
yes.
So
I was
I
thinking about the same thing, Jeannie. Like when Marlborough became a language immersion school, that's the first thing we talked about. It's like, improving our environment so that really did become language rich, whether it was the dual languages or whether it was like the pictures, the different regalia. We were really intentional about transforming our environment. It goes back to exactly what Kim was saying, that the environment matters, when how we're reflecting on creating spaces that foster inclusivity. And so that is advancing excellence and equity, right? Because we're making sure that the students, again, communication is a right, that they have access and opportunities to express themselves. And so it ties into exactly what your reflection was.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. If you have questions, feel free to reach out, and hopefully you'll be able to access the slides, etc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.